CNN has just had a report on the question marks around this year's scheduled Tokyo Summer Olympics. It's which would be I think, the 32nd Olympiad. Um, Let me just say from the outset, I have enormous sympathy with the athletes and organizers who, um, were anticipating this before the pandemic, and it's all been turned upside down. I have enormous sympathy with them, and with a story like this, people often will follow up that in the grand scheme of things, it's secondary. It's ultimately just a sporting event. Happens to be the biggest, happens to be the most prominent sporting event in the world, along with the Football World Cup. But it's, I see it as part of universal human culture. And it is one of the tragedies of this pandemic that so many things have been impacted. Of course, the foremost tragedy is the 3 million plus people who've lost their lives and all the grieving families that goes with that, and people who've lost their jobs and all the other disruption that's come with it. Nothing in modern times has been as disruptive as the coronavirus pandemic. Nothing, in terms of a global disruption. So I'm just thinking about what sort of course can happen out of this. The CNN correspondent was speaking to a businessman in Tokyo who described it as a suicide mission. To see if I can get his name up. I tend to take photos directly from the screen to prepare for videos like this, so I can reference it easier than doing like looking at a source. Yeah, Hiroshi Mikitani, CEO of Rakuten, he's described it as a suicide mission, i.e., that it would go ahead. The new Japanese Prime Minister and his government are digging their heels in. Yoshihide Suga, he insists this is going to go ahead. I don't know if that's a question of national pride or stubbornness or what. Um, Hosting an Olympic Games is a major prestige for any country. Tokyo has hosted before in 19, I think it was 64, yeah, 1964. Rome was 1960, Mexico City 1968. I'm just my Olympic history into order here. So there is a president of Tokyo hosting the games. Tokyo is a modern city, a vibrant city. I'm sure it's very capable of doing it. But even without the pandemic, there's some question marks. Um, it's only 10 years since the devastating Fukushima nuclear reaction and the earthquake. So there are questions around the radiation issues around that. Um, I think when all is said, it may be that the best course of action is to postpone this again until summer next year, summer 2022. Now, the Beijing Winter Olympics are taking place next year, um, and assuming they go ahead, there might be international boycotts given the issues that are going on geopolitically with China right now. I personally, just a quick word since it's related to the Olympics, I absolutely think we should not allow the Chinese to use it as a propaganda event because in 2008, when they brought the Olympic torch around the world, they very much used that to promote Chinese nationalism. It was a bit of a facade to say it was all about the human spirit. The Chinese were very much promoting quite an aggressive form of nationalism. At the very same time, of course, they were killing monks in Tibet, and diaspora were bullying people who dared to speak out against the CCP. I do think there needs to be some international rebuke against China. Full Olympic boycott, I'm not sure, but because remember in 1936, even when the Holocaust was, well advanced at that point, in terms of its, the foundations of those mass killings, the Berlin Olympics went ahead. So there is precedence. I think it's naive to say the Olympics isn't political. There is always a political dimension to it. But anyway, the point I was making is Beijing Winter Olympics go ahead in 2022 and the Tokyo Summer Olympics go ahead. I don't think that's a problem because it's happened before. There has been previous years where the Winter and Summer Olympics were held in the same year. It's only in the last, I think, 50 or 60 years or less even, that the winter and summer games have been held in different years, intermittently every 2 years. So I don't think there's any reason why a summer games and winter games can't happen in the same year. Different countries, different organisation. I don't see why that would be a problem. Um, then of course the next summer games is Paris 2024, Los Angeles 2028. I do think one mistake that the IOC made was the change in their policy whereby they would name two cities at once, because it was always the case that there would be the city that would announce the host, which even in itself was a prestige, city that got to make the announcement. And then there would be 7 years of preparation. So, for example, London was named as the Olympic City in 2005. I was in London that week, 7 years before London hosted the Summer Games. What they'd done the last time around was they named two future games, Paris 2024, Los Angeles 2028 at once. I think that was a mistake because we've seen from the pandemic that there can be forces that are unpredictable. So for something to be set in stone, Tokyo's already been, postponed. It would have been held last year. So I think the IOC need to be cautious about that. Of course, planning an Olympic Games takes a lot, so a city does need time. It does need good 7 years. There was criticism in the Rio de Janeiro Games that of slum clearances and so on. So there is always question marks around Olympic Games. But I don't agree with those who say it's insignificant and it should just be, yeah, who cares? I don't agree with that sentiment because let me make an analogy. During the Second World War, when there were campaigns to save priceless art, people said, is that really the priority? It was what the Monuments Men was based off. But the point was made, or the overriding theme of the film was that art represents human culture. And if we allow the forces of totalitarianism to destroy that, then what's the point of where's you know where's the values of fighting for an ideal if you're not going to look at foundation of human culture? Now, of course, in this situation, it's not so much a totalitarian regime; it is a pandemic that's hit the whole world. And this Indian variant is very concerning. It's a very serious situation out there that might impact the UK here. Boris Johnson has said that um, business is going to reopen as usual, but there's going to be more restrictions in those cities that have detected the Indian variant. I think Johnson would be very, very reluctant to go into another lockdown. I don't think he will. And of course, his words would come back to haunt him if that happened. Um, but although we're winning the battle in this country, it's very far from over. And added to that, you have a growing number of people now actively promoting conspiracy theories as to whether COVID even exists. I know a few in my life, and I don't want that's probably more for another video, but it's uh, it's been so disruptive, and I think the game should go ahead next year. Depending on I mean, if it's at a point where the Indian variant has really, really went beyond Indian borders and really severely impacted other countries, then it probably will have to be cancelled altogether. But at some point, we'll have to have a return to normality because that is not a trivial issue. I have huge sympathy for the athletes. I mean, people who trivialize that just have a little bit of empathy. These are people who train intensely to be the best at what they do, and to say, well, actually, this isn't going to happen now. It's going to happen next year. That is a huge blow. It puts people in a real limbo in terms of organizing, in terms of training. I've had a big disappointment myself recently, which I don't want to divulge in details here, but it was a big blow, and that was after 6 months. I can imagine athletes training for 2 or 3 years. It's a huge thing so people shouldn't trivialize that. They shouldn't say, oh, it's just a sport. um of course the deaths of coronavirus are the main issue, and businesses and job losses are major issue as well, but I wouldn't trivialize the impact this has on people's routine. I wouldn't trivialize that at all. um So I do have huge sympathy. I've also sympathy for the organisers because it would be a sad thing if Tokyo was totally scrapped and that city just was deprived of the chance to host when they won the bid. Uh, but it has to be said that a growing number of the Japanese public are now against it, along with business leaders. So it must be disillusioning for athletes to know that there isn't public support for what they're going to do. So that's another reason for postponing it, because then when things are hopefully more settled down worldwide with the pandemic, hopefully then there will be more public support within Japan. Because if I was an athlete and I thought, I'm taking part in a major event or what should be a major event, and there's fewer people watching it, I'd think, what's the point? Okay, I'm setting an achievement for myself, but it's also part of a major event. I mean, I think that aspect of it is to have your achievements recognized. And if people aren't watching, then they're not technically recognized in the same way, even if you get a medal. So there's a lot of aspects to that. I've just huge sympathy with them. I really do. Um, but I think probably the best outcome is for the IOC to. I think the IOC needs to make a decision. They can't keep people in limbo like this. That's one of the worst things, and it's something I've had to deal with recently, being in limbo. I think given a choice of getting bad news and dealing with it versus not knowing, people will always choose getting the bad news and dealing with it. So I do think at this point the IOC just should just come out and say, sorry, the games are happening in summer next year. That's it. And the Japanese government will need to accept that and just offer the support they can to the organisers. And that's how I see it. Let me know your thoughts. I'm not saying this is a major priority in regard to COVID, but I am talking about it in this video. And I do have, I keep saying this, but it's true. I have huge sympathy for the athletes and for others involved, their families as well. There's so many question marks when you're in that situation. Um, I mean, if they're training in preparation, because the training routine would change if it's a few weeks or over 1 year in terms of the time frame and so on. So it does matter. Um, but I just hope they get some closure in terms of what's going to happen because that's something that needs to be done. Let me know your thoughts.